We will move forward with the next panel discussion. We will have 3 people offline sitting here and 2 people online. Hopefully they're in the meeting room right now. And please welcome the panel discussion, Problems and Challenges in Decentralized Organizations. And why are we talking about this? This concludes literally taxes, GDPR, tech, everything.
Taxation too.
Taxation, yeah, taxes. So please welcome Roman German from Krüpto Klubi, who's going to be the moderator. And the panelists with us are Kaido Künnapas, yeah, from Sorainen, George Basiladze, founder of Word, please welcome here. And online, we will have with us 2 people, Alexa Mill, the host of DAO Today podcast, and Johnny Chin, the co-founder of Origami. So please welcome everyone. I see that online people are with us. Enjoy the stage.
Thank you, and hello everybody. So let's start from the round of introductions. George, you have 60 seconds to say who you are and how are you associated with DAOs.
Yes, my name is George. I'm co-founder of Word. We are a regulated virtual asset service provider, and we provide fiat to crypto exchange as a service called on-ramp, and we also will be doing off-ramps. We work with NFT marketplaces, Web3 businesses, DAOs, and we help the consumers to get onboarded into this new Web3 thing. It can be through a purchase of a token or a cryptocurrency or NFT, anything which is sold on chain. We enable the consumers to buy it with just a credit or debit card.
Thank you. Kaido?
Yeah, by profession, I'm a tax lawyer and I work with Sorainen. We advise a lot businesses with new business models in crypto sectors and for instance, in ride sharing, so on. So this is sort of the algorithm of resolving those issues we see around DAOs. These are quite familiar for me from my work. I also teach in Tallinn Technology University, also in the law department. So we have lots of students who are eager to look into those new topics and then research and then propose maybe new things to regulators to think of. And I'm also an enthusiast Harley rider, and Harley rider's motto is ride free until you meet police. So I can see that we have more or less the same range of issues here. So I feel that topic.
Thank you. So people online, Alexa, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexa. I'm host of DAO Today podcast, which is an educational show on DAOs and blockchain, and where we discuss their on-chain and off-chain challenges with the main focus on legal and compliance. And I'm also the founder of Alexa Consulting, where we help on blockchain-based projects establish their governance operations with product development and legal and compliance. And thank you for having me here.
Thank you. And Johnny?
Hey everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm one of the Genesis members and leaders of Orange DAO, and through that experience, I grew increasingly bullish and excited about this new form of human coordination, DAOs. And so I decided to start Origami with a few of the other leaders of Orange DAO. We help other communities, founders, and companies launch DAOs from the beginning, and we help with the tooling, with the guidance, and I'm very excited to be here today.
Thanks. And a few words about myself. I'm mainly a crypto educator, so my job kind of is to run Krüpto Klubi, which is in Estonia a non-profit organization. That's idea is to teach people about how to use crypto, what crypto is, and so on. But as you see, we have a panel of really good people. So let's get to the questions. And I have a confession to make to you guys. So in one of the earlier panels, somebody said that if you answer, then don't use answers generated by ChatGPT. So these questions that I'm about to ask, they are generated by ChatGPT. And basically what I did, I said, imagine that you are the crypto guy and you know everything about crypto and DAOs, and give me a plan of what are the questions that I should ask the panelist. And I say that he did a really good job. I maybe improved like 5% on top of that, but let's see how it goes. So, and the panelists didn't know that, so that's the first time they hear that. So let's start with the first part of our panel, coordination. So question to you guys, what are the biggest challenges in coordinating a DAO? And maybe let's start with you, George.
I would say I have never run a DAO, but I've seen many DAOs running and people participating in the DAO. So I think that the biggest challenge is, as with any business which is decentralized, coordinating people who do not see each other, who are allocated in different time zones, who are allocated in God knows where, use different communication tools and so on. So running a DAO, it's like with any other business, you have to coordinate people, you have to make everybody aligned, and DAO gives its pros, like many things are pre-approved or pre-arranged, but still there are things that you have to do. Discord channels, Slack channels, you can avoid it.
Okay, does anybody want to add?
I personally think that community management is the main topic for coordination. I understand the purpose of DAO is to sort of bring more democracy into the corporate world, to give more power to actual stakeholders and voters and people who are around the organizations. And democracy is, in principle, it's a very nice thing. But from the history, we can see that it can lead to bad examples as well. If you don't protect the interests of minority and if you don't have a sort of reasonable foundation for that organization in a country being a constitution, for instance. So managing the community and ensuring that the interests of minorities in different senses are also protected, I think that's the sort of key. And I think this is if there are any issues, then I think this is the moment when legislators also start to look more closely what happens there.
Johnny, you have really good experience in running a DAO. So what would you say are the biggest challenges you guys are having?
Yeah, you're dealing with people all over the world. Sometimes they're pseudo-anonymous. I think the biggest thing is attention, right? It's an extension of community management, which is how do you engage your contributors? We now have the ability to switch different DAOs with the click of a button by going through Discord. So you constantly need to hype and or internally market the excitement of the DAO, which is in and of itself a very difficult task. So I find that being very challenging. And so what ends up happening is there needs to be a huge investment in vibes, and vibes is obviously something very squishy, but it's important to have in real life events or virtual events for people to hang out. Something that really came to mind was that for DAOs, this virtual third place is a notion that's so important, and I really have seen that through the experiences of Orange DAO as well as with these other DAOs.
Alexa, do you want to add something?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So I think when it comes to DAOs, decentralization might be an issue, but I do not see it as the main issue, because that's the whole point of DAOs as organizations, to be decentralized and to support the development of a decentralized community. And I think after COVID, we became quite capable of working from home, and that further confirmed the power and the capabilities of decentralization as such. I do think that the general issue when it comes to DAOs is the lack of education, because the community itself, I agree with you, Johnny, that community engagement and keeping that vibe going is a real challenge. And I think that really comes from the lack of education, since the community is fairly new to Web3, there, especially to DAOs, and it takes some time to learn how to behave within the DAO, what is the role of the community within the DAO, and what their power within the DAO actually is. And to escape that Web2 mindset where we are relying highly on a centralized management and a group of people that will do all the job for us, and we are just like kind of show up on Discord, vibe a bit, play games, and go home, right? So it doesn't really work that way. Additional thing is that, again, Johnny, to your point regarding Discord, you just go keep on scrolling and hopping from one server to another. And the problem is that Discord can be a full-time job if you really want to get it to be engaged within the DAO. And it just takes some time to actually create DAOs as places where people can actually really contribute, work for the DAO, and get rewarded for the DAO, and not be expected to just hang out and stay there for 24 hours and dedicate the whole time. So there is a huge part is the education on improving the DAO governance, the DAO operation that is actually supportive of the community and of the project. And I mean, that's the beauty of decentralization, actually, because you get access to a global pool of talent and to so many new people that you can actually create with. Thank you.
So a follow-up question. Usually we all work in regular companies. So we know that companies usually have goals, they have measures in place, how to measure the effectiveness if the company is reaching its goals or not. So I have a question to you guys. How do you define the success of a DAO? Is it really fulfilling its function or not? And let's start with Johnny.
Yeah, that's a great question. You can look at things that are measurable, and especially on chain. So you can look at the number of proposals that are written for the DAO, the number of participants that are voting on those proposals. Did it reach quorum, meaning did it have enough voters for that proposal? It is helpful if you actually have the governance token for your DAO. What I find, and I'm taking a little bit of a detour here, but to bring it back, so bear with me. The governance token is this nice carrot for DAO participants to continue to be engaged, and also to help find different goals for the different aspects or different teams of the DAO. And so you can use that almost as a measuring stick to see if the different teams and if the DAO collectively is getting closer towards its goals. So for instance, in Orange DAO's case, one of our main metrics or goals for this season, so a season is a 6-month period in DAO speak, is for a certain amount of contributors to have earned at least X amount of the governance token, which means in their own specific fields, they have contributed to the DAO and therefore have earned the token.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to add? George?
I would say that every DAO has a purpose, and it's up to the community of the DAO to define how the purpose is being achieved or not. But that's a very beauty of the DAOs, is that you have a purpose straight away from the very beginning, and it's very clear to all the community members that there is a purpose, and this is how people get inside the DAO. It's not like a company or a community club. It's much bigger, and you can get an alignment of your contribution, and you can see your achievement, usually on chain, how your contribution is corresponding to the achievement of the purpose of the DAO.
Kaido, Alexa, do you guys wish to add something?
Yeah, I think generally the general issue with DAOs is there is no actual, majority of DAOs does not really have a business revenue model, or some of them don't even have a product. So for that, it's quite difficult to measure the success and the growth of the business and of the project and of the product. So what I think is another issue is that everything people think, since it's decentralized, right? So it's kind of all fun and games, but there is not really enough accountability amongst the members and those that initiated the project. So having some sort of like a business metrics, project metrics is actually what can help the DAO be more successful. And the current success measures would rather be, again, like on the community, how involved and how engaged the community actually is, how active are they on voting on the DAO proposals, are they, do they give feedback on the proposals and on whatever the DAO is doing. And of course, if there is existing product, how is actually that product performing in the business along with it? And it's, I mean, generally the issues that's missing, and not many projects are implementing any sort of metrics to see how, so they can compare their work in the past months or in the past season or to this one. And hopefully that will also change over the time. But community would be one of the main metrics of a DAO success.
Yes.
Another way how you can define the success, yes, the community engagement. So we as a company of Vert, we are users of Compound, the Compound Finance lending protocol, the DAO. And there, as you use the product, you get rewarded with the community tokens, with the governance token Compound. So once we become bigger, we will be able to affect which currencies and which assets can be used as collateral and can be borrowed from the DAO itself, from the protocol itself. So this is a great way for the protocol to engage with the users and to reward them for decision making and for using the product. So this is kind of another way how you can measure the success of a DAO, how the community is using the DAO, how the users are using the product.
I have a question for people in the audience. Show with your hand if you have ever gone online, looked up any DAO, and then went onto their website and read the proposal that the community members have been doing on this proposal. Like, have you seen what are the proposals, and have you seen if people voted on these proposals? Show of hands. Okay, it's actually quite a lot of hands. So my question now is that I've done that as well several times, and one of the things I've noticed is that people make proposals, but most often these proposals fail because people really are not bothered to go and vote for these proposals. So my question for the panelists is that how to actually get the people to vote? How do you make them care enough that they will go there, they will read the proposal, and then they will actually take this time to understand it and then vote either yes or no. And maybe John is the best guy who has hands-on experience with that.
Yeah, I'll use a term that people might cringe, Web 2.5, which means that although we want to move towards a fully decentralized world, we need to embrace certain Web 2 tools that people are used to using, like email, newsletters, Twitter. So we have seen the most successful DAOs with regards to engagement of the community members to vote has been in the form of being able to explain what's happening through these multiple channels. That's super important, and that ends up being very practical for some organizations that can do that. So that's my short answer.
What do you think on the side of, like, is that only like the Web 2 tooling that helps the community get more involved in the proposals? From what experience, I've been involved in DAOs as a member, contributor, advisor, consultant, like whatever role there was, I probably did it or doing it. And the interface itself is not really an issue. What the issue is that the community is just not, it's only word to use, like train to actually go on that page and check the new proposals, actually stay updated on whatever is happening with the DAO, and it can be often over like too crowded, right? Like, with many updates and the lack of organization of actually everything what's been happening within the DAO. And another issue is that, of course, like when you're kicking off the project, of course, you have to start in a quite centralized manner because it's just the nature, and then you start decentralizing. But the issue is that the founders not really from the very beginning teach the community how to do a DAO. And basically, right, so everything is centrally decided, no transparency, no communication, just few community calls and Twitter spaces, and all hype is there and great. And then when you need to start to have community voting on the proposals, what happens is just like, boom, go and vote. It doesn't work that way because you did not teach them like in small steps how to actually really be involved in the DAO, in any of the DAO decisions. So the problem from my experience is the lack of that onboarding period where you're actually teaching your community how to DAO, and not to have, I don't know, 5 different pages where they can go and check the proposals, or just have only few people who are actually engaged in making those proposals happen. So I think like there was a slight disconnect in that regard, and that's what's causing actually the lack of interest of the community to vote. And the hijacks of the governance, whales, those are many of the reasons why people just are not interested to vote, because many are of the mindset, well, my holdings are too small, so a whale will override me anyways, and the governance does not have any mechanisms in place to actually protect from that type of governance hijack.
Thank you. I liked the term "how to DAO." It makes for a really good website or brand name, I think, if anybody wants to launch a business. But let's go to the compliance part. And basically, let's start with the most basic question. What's the biggest legal and regulatory challenges that you will face if you want to run or create a DAO? And maybe let's start with Kaido.
Yes, thank you. So I think the biggest challenge that comes from the nature of DAO is the liability topic. The idea of the DAO is to do things in a decentralized way, and in a legal world it corresponds to the form of partnership. It's not a legal body, but it's still a form of cooperation to do business or do whatever other things. And the issue is that if members of partnership are doing something together, or if someone out of them is doing something by its own, then all members of the partnership are liable for these activities. And this goes back for hundreds and hundreds of years, when people discovered that, well, it's maybe not the wisest thing to do business in that way. And this is how limited liability companies were created around 1600s, this Dutch East Indian Company and so on and so forth. And the corporate body gives some sort of shield to the shareholders. But in DAO, there is no such shield. And I understand this is the reason why we see in the US, we see those DAO LLCs emerging, because these provide, first of all, this liability shield for the shareholders or DAO members. So I think that's the most tricky part to overpass, so that you will have some sort of protection, so that if you belong to DAO and somebody screws up, then you don't lose your house. So if you have that risk, you don't want to become a member of DAO. So how to address that? And that's a question to legislators, I guess. There are tools how to do that, but maybe not in the form of having, again, a separate company, which goes against the nature of DAO.
Thanks. George, earlier we were speaking here just like an hour ago, and you mentioned several challenges you had as well when trying to get the licenses in Estonia. So what were the biggest legal and regulatory challenges for you?
I didn't make a DAO, no. But for DAOs, as I see, so we are a regulated VASP, and meaning that we can work with DAOs as legal entities, and we can accept them as business customers. But this is a very big challenge for any financial institution to accept DAO as a customer, because there's no legal entity. According to current laws, you cannot accept DAO as a B2B customer, but it's up to our own internal policies how we work with DAOs. The biggest problem is that you never know what's the source of funds. So who is the DAO contributor? I mean, what is the actual which is the actual person behind the Ethereum transaction, for example, that contributed to DAO? And it's a big challenge because even if you can accept DAO as a B2B customer, you want to know the actual name of the natural person or legal person that has contributed to DAO. And it's not really possible to do unless that person wants to get identified. Another challenge, again, the source of funds, is where this Ethereum or underlying cryptocurrency is coming from. You can screen that DAO contributions through chain analysis or any other service provider that does blockchain screening, but it still doesn't give you much knowledge about who is the actual person. So this is more of a topic of understanding kind of who's the UBO behind the DAO or proxy to UBO. So you can do that, but it's very challenging. It requires a lot of not legal, rather than educational work with DAOs and how to onboard them. It's a big challenge, but it can be fixed. It can be overcome.
Thanks. Johnny, I have a question for you. So a few days ago when we had this pre-panel call to discuss what to talk about, you talked that you are involved in something called origami, right? Which helps others who want to create the DAO. You help them to decide kind of how and what to do. So if I or somebody else in the audience would like to launch a DAO, how would you go on choosing where to register the legal entity? Is it like Estonia, the States, or how do you go about that?
Yeah, so compliance is a big bottleneck, a big issue that's stopping more mainstream adoption for DAOs. We're talking with some major brands that are absolutely intrigued and enthusiastic and excited to launch DAOs, but it needs to be done legally. It needs to be done from a compliant manner. So what we do is we don't give legal advice, but we do work with some of the best law firms around the world and act as a go-between between these organizations and the law firms to figure out what is the best jurisdiction. So it is absolutely important to incorporate. You want to protect the members from liability, but to think about, what's the vision of this DAO? What's the experience that they would like? What does success look like? And then back into today and how and where to form that incorporation. Something that we have called the origami framework, which was what we used for Orange DAO, which was innovative at the time, was using a traditional VC fund and then having a separate nonprofit be the DAO. What it allowed us to do is collect limited partners. So they were investing in a traditional VC fund, nothing too exotic. And it also allowed over 100 members to be members of the DAO, and they didn't need to be accredited investors. And so there are these frameworks, there are legal ways of setting up DAOs where you can enact the vision that you want. It's just a matter of speaking with lawyers and figuring them out, which can be cost prohibitive. It can be very expensive. And so fortunately, there are a lot of organizations that are trying to figure that out to make it more streamlined and easier for DAO founders to do so. And so I'm very optimistic within the next few months, it'll get easier and easier and easier and cheaper and cheaper.
I would just add that the type of entity that you're choosing for DAO, for incorporating the entity that represents DAO, actually really depends on the nature of the project, right? So the main problem regulatory challenge of DAOs actually stems from its decentralized nature. How do you regulate the organization that is cross-jurisdictional? Which taxes you apply? Which compliance laws do you apply? And what was earlier mentioned, DAOs are often confused with general partnerships, and general partnerships are a business arrangement of two or more people who equally share its profit, losses, and liabilities, meaning that everyone involved can be liable with their private assets. And that is one of the biggest challenges of the DAOs, and we had an example of such in the US last year when actually a lawsuit was filed against the DAO on that very basis. I would argue that a legal entity is actually opposite to the DAO nature, because the legal entity does not have a role as it does in a traditional way. I see it rather as a tool that you can use to protect your project and those people who are involved until there is a better regulatory framework in place. In the US, starting with Wyoming, followed by Tennessee, Utah, and outside of the US, Marshall Island, they came up with a DAO LLC, which allows limitation liability of the people who are involved. Though that legislation is innovating, but it's far from perfect and very supportive of the DAO nature. When it comes to choosing which type of entity and which jurisdiction one should incorporate that project in, that first and foremost depends on where the project founders are from, where the potential investors are from. What type of project are you building? Are you building a for-profit or not-for-profit type of project? Are you DeFi? Are you impact? Are you NFT? Are you metaverse? So those are all the elements that you need to take into consideration before actually deciding which jurisdiction. Some of the jurisdictions that we do have are first choice just because they do have the DAO LLC regulation, and everyone thinks that's amazing, that's great, just go for it. But it doesn't work that way, because you have to also understand what are the international law applications and whether a DAO incorporated in an offshore jurisdiction can collaborate freely with countries that are within EU. Additional issue for DAOs are actually the crypto asset regulations as well, right? So for example, in the EU, MiCA is coming in year 2. We know really well what is general attitude of the US towards the industry in general. And some other places are thinking to regulate, some are not even close to it. So those are the challenges that one needs to take into consideration, right? So where the funders are from, where the investors are from, what type of business are you building? Is it for profit? Is it not for profit? Where are you looking to do business with? Are you focusing on EU? Are you focusing on the US? Whether you fall under MiCA and whether
I have a follow-up question here. So I understand it takes a lot of, there's like lots of different factors to decide where one would go and register the DAO, like the legal entity. But I'm a simple man, so I like simple answers. If you would
well, you might be a simple man, but this is not a very simple environment to work with, and I would appreciate if you did not interrupt me.
I will give an example of a DAO that, like an idea of a DAO, and maybe you guys can give like an like where would you go and register this DAO? So I was sitting in the audience earlier, and the idea for a DAO came to me just so if you're online and you get all these cookie, do I accept the cookie pop-ups? So I really hate them. So I have an idea, maybe there should be a DAO where we try to get rid of whatever the law is that asks you to have these pop-ups. So just, this is like a really random, maybe stupid idea, but my question to you guys is like, what would be the jurisdiction where you would go and register the legal entity for such a DAO? Thank you.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's not recommendable that you just go and choose jurisdiction. Hey, I think this jurisdiction is cool, and we did that. It's very dangerous to give that type of advice on a panel like this, because some people actually may take the advice and harm the project in the longer run. And there are different jurisdictions to consider and different elements to consider. I'm telling you this because I work as a legal consultant for DAOs, and I'm working with loads of lawyers that are actually in crypto and DAO space. And it really takes a careful legal and business assessment to understand what jurisdiction is appropriate, not just the one that sounds good and interesting to incorporate in, and what worked for others.
My short answer would be the Colorado Co-op, because you can actually have distribution of profits to patrons. Distribution of profits is a big blocker in the DAO space today, as you guys know. So Colorado Co-op does stand out above the rest to do more research on.
Yeah, but many are moving out from there. So it really depends on the business.
Any ideas here?
I wouldn't register DAO. I would keep it decentralized. Why? I mean, yes, there is a liability, but unless all the contributors to the DAO are anonymous, and they are anonymous until it's proven otherwise, then there's no liability. Who can prove that you are a contributor to a DAO? It's you. It's everybody is pseudo-anonymous or anonymous. Then this is a way to go. And as DAOs are built to be decentralized, I don't think that unless it is absolutely necessary to register it somehow, you should register it. No real need. I mean, some of the functions and some of the reasons why the DAO wants to be registered, like paying employees or paying for rent or something, it can be there's other way to do it other than registering it as a legal entity. You can use a contributor of a DAO as a proxy to the business expense that you're doing as a DAO. There are many creative ways how you can avoid being registered. And I think that for DAOs, it's really, really important to understand, do they really need to be registered, or is it just the lawyer or somebody else told you to get registered?
Yeah, I understand the idea was to get rid of law that requires to have cookies. So most probably it's called something like lobbying. So don't definitely do it in Lithuania. I understand if you mention that word there, you can go to jail. But it's about EU law. So I think you don't need organization for that, registered organization. You just have to, collect sufficient amount of signatures and go to the EU, or I don't know, EU Parliament, some commission, or to the Estonian government with these signatures, and then this is how it works. This is how lawyers sometimes do it.
Thank you. Good suggestions. So let's go on to the taxation part and talk a little bit about how are DAOs taxed. And earlier, Kaido, when we were talking, you said that you can actually say how when a new business model such as a DAO emerges, like how these tax laws typically react to new things.
Yeah, well, usually tax laws react as any other laws. So governments usually wait and see what happens. If things evolve to positive direction, business grows, this new model, grows, has more understanding among population, there's no need to regulate that. But usually once something bad happens or bad trends are emerging, then government starts thinking how to regulate the issue. So one example is from the sharing economy. It was a new model for bringing together people, like if you take the example of Bolt, for instance, drivers and passengers are brought together, and there were not much regulations on that at first, but then several questions came up whether people who are driving with the cars and providing sort of service, are they working for somebody? Do they need some sort of social guarantees? Do they work too much? Do they get exhausted and then have car accidents and so on and so forth? Are they contributing the fair share of taxes to the society and also to our social security systems and so on? And usually this is the moment when government starts to regulate. And if by that time there are bad examples, often governments start to overreact, as we have seen in crypto world, for instance.
Okay, thanks. So question to you guys, how are, like, when we think about taxation, then are there any implications that you should decide if I run my DAO this way or that way? Like, can there be any implications down the road regarding how are you taxed? Like, is what I'm trying to understand is that are there different ways how you can run a DAO that will actually down the line kind of mean that are you having to pay tax or not to pay tax and so on? Whoever wants to take this one.
So I can continue here. So it's very jurisdiction specific question, depending on under which jurisdiction you will fall with your DAO. I can bring an example of Estonia. If you are ordinary DAO, you are qualified as a partnership, meaning that if DAO earns something, it's attributed to the partners, DAO members, and the income is taxed as their income proportionally and on an annual basis. If you are setting up your structure so that you have DAO that is attached to a company, for instance, Estonian company, you can enjoy our very nice deferred corporate income tax regime, meaning that if company earns something and is not distributing it to the DAO members, it can reinvest the profits before taxes, meaning that you have 20% more to reinvest. And also you can defer the tax liability as long as you want, basically, until you make distributions to DAO members. So I know some business companies even work so that they have a corporate body that makes business, and on top of this there are shareholders, but they have a partnership, basically a DAO, but not in a fancy technical way, more traditional DAO, like bike gang, for instance. So in Estonia it would work so, but I know in US it works differently. So if you're a partnership, you can sometimes be a taxpayer, sometimes your members are taxpayers. So usually it would make sense to have DAO itself or the body to be a taxpayer, but yeah, it's a very country specific question, and I wouldn't give any specific advice here as well.
Thank you.
Well, something I would add, while on the specifics of being a DAO contributor, right? You are doing work on behalf of the DAO and you're being given tokens from the DAO. Something that is not widely known is, let's say the token is worth $10 when you receive it, and by the time you pay your taxes, it's worth $3. What you owe would be on the $10 when you received it. So not many DAO members know this, and I think that's really important because when tax season comes up, you owe more than you expect.
So we have 2 minutes until the end. So I have a question for all of you guys. So what's something very important in this area that we didn't talk about today, but we should have talked, in your opinion? So whoever wants to take it first.
I would say that I think mainstream adoption is right around the corner. I'm more optimistic on it than most people are. And I think we need to solve a few of these problems that we brought up: operations, coordination, taxation, and compliance before we get that. So the good news is mainstream is almost here. And the less good news is we have to fix all this stuff in order to make that a reality.
Thank you. Anybody else? Something important that we didn't talk about today, but should have?
Real quick, I would encourage DAO formations. The more DAOs we have, the better, because this is a kind of a new sandbox regime for the way the societies are run and controlled. So more DAOs we have, more experiments we have about how the societies are built, how people vote, how people contribute. And that's the result of those experiments can be brought into real life, and democracies can be improved, decision-making in the governments can be improved based on how the decisions are made in DAOs. This is a very important sandbox, and it's great that it exists.
Yeah. So yeah, if you ride a Harley and you don't like speed limits, then don't wait for the ticket, but think how to change the speed limit. So I think what is very important topic is how to have a sort of structured discussions with the government to make them understand that this is an okay thing. Don't overreact, and if bad things sometimes happens, then let's discuss how to overcome it, not overreact.
Thank you.
I would also add that it's really important to understand that there is no one solution fits them all. And it's important to think longer term than just short term, because when you're building for the future, not for the next few months, and you're building to make an impact in the area that you want to make an impact. So it's important to, first of all, get educated, educate yourself, first of all, how DAOs operate and how DAOs work, and also educate your communities on how DAOs operate, so you can actually have a supportive community with whatever market is, whether bear or bull, because after all, the community is the one that will keep the project going. And get advice from people who understand the legal compliance, tax, and other issues that may arise from the project. And legal entity is a tool. It's not a limitation or a killer of a DAO, no matter what others say.
Thank you, everybody, and very glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panel, and thank you, online speakers.